My parents sabotaged my first startup and handed my biggest clients to my sister's company. I started over from scratch. Years later, after my cybersecurity firm became one of the fastest growing companies in the country, Mom texted, "Family dinner, no excuses." I walked in, and they finally realized what they'd lost. Hello everyone, my name is Avery Collins. I'm 34 years old, and the first company I ever built didn't fail because of bad products. It didn't fail because of poor leadership. It didn't fail because of the market. It failed because my own parents secretly gave my biggest clients to my older sister. Then they looked me in the eyes and told me, business is business. 5 years later, the cybersecurity company I rebuilt from absolutely nothing appeared on the cover of a national business magazine. The headline read, "The CEO Transforming Corporate Cybersecurity." Less than 24 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Just 6 words. "Family dinner, no excuses. Sunday, 7 p.m. No congratulations, no apology. No, we're proud of you. Just an order." Against every instinct I had, I went. When I walked into the private dining room, my parents were already seated. So was my sister. But they weren't alone. A man in an expensive navy suit immediately stood when he saw me. He smiled, walked straight toward me, extended his hand, then loudly said, "Ms. Collins, I've been hoping we'd finally meet." The color disappeared from my sister's face because she knew exactly who he was, and she also knew why he was there. But none of that makes sense unless you understand how my family destroyed the first dream I ever built. Growing up, there were always 2 futures in my parents' minds. The future they planned for my older sister, and the future they expected me to figure out myself. My sister Rachel was 2 years older. Outgoing, confident, naturally charming. I was quieter. I loved computers, programming, taking apart broken electronics, just to understand how they worked. Dad used to laugh. "You'll never make money playing with computers." Rachel wanted to open a business someday. Mom proudly told everyone, "My oldest is going to be an entrepreneur." When I won statewide programming competitions, Dad smiled politely. "That's nice." Then immediately asked Rachel how her marketing classes were going. By college, I'd already decided something. I wasn't going to wait for anyone's approval. I earned scholarships, interned with cybersecurity firms, graduated near the top of my class. At 25, I launched my own cybersecurity consulting company. It wasn't glamorous, just me, a rented office, 2 laptops, a folding desk, and an endless amount of determination. The first year nearly broke me. I worked 16-hour days, answered support calls at midnight, met clients during lunch breaks. Sometimes, I slept in the office because driving home wasted time. Slowly, things changed. One satisfied client referred another. Small businesses became regional companies. Regional companies became national contracts. By year 3, I employed 12 people. We had just landed our biggest client yet, a healthcare network worth more than my company's annual revenue. I was terrified and excited. Then, Mom called. "We're so proud of you." Those words felt unfamiliar. She asked if Rachel could stop by my office. "She wants to learn from you." I smiled. Of course. Rachel visited often after that. She asked questions, observed meetings, complimented my work. I honestly believed, for the first time in our lives, we were becoming sisters. One afternoon, she asked, "Can I look through your client presentation?" "It's brilliant." I didn't think twice. Sure. That decision cost me everything. Within 2 months, 3 of my largest clients suddenly canceled their contracts. Every single one gave almost the exact same explanation. "We've decided to go another direction." Then, I discovered where they'd gone. Rachel had opened her own cybersecurity consulting company, with almost identical marketing, almost identical service packages. And somehow, she'd contacted every major client I'd spent years building relationships with. I couldn't understand how, until one former client quietly called me. "Avery, I thought you knew." "Knew what?" "Your father introduced Rachel as your business partner. He told us your company was shutting down." My hands started shaking. "That's impossible. He also shared your pricing and your contract renewal dates." I sat there in complete silence. Only 4 people knew those details. Me, my accountant, and my parents, because I'd proudly shared every milestone with them. That evening, I drove straight to their house. Rachel was already there, laughing with Mom. Dad looked surprised to see me. "What happened?" I placed the cancellation letters on the table. "Did you tell my clients my company was closing?" Silence. Rachel looked away. Dad calmly answered, "We helped Rachel make introductions." My heart stopped. "You what?" Mom smiled awkwardly. She needed a chance too. You gave her my clients. Dad shrugged. You'll build another company. Rachel needed the opportunity more. I stared at them. You destroyed mine. Dad folded his arms. Business is business. Rachel finally spoke. I didn't steal anything. They chose me. I quietly looked at her. They chose you. The information you had no right to have. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. 6 months later, my company closed. 12 employees lost their jobs. I personally called every one of them. It remains the hardest week of my life. The following month, I packed everything I owned, moved nearly 1,000 miles away, changed my phone number, and promised myself one thing. If I ever built another company, no one would ever be able to destroy it from the inside again. The second company started even smaller. Just me again. One laptop, one client, one opportunity. This time, I never discussed confidential business with anyone outside the company. Years passed. My team grew. 20 employees became 50. 50 became 200. Our cybersecurity software began protecting hospitals, banks, universities, government contractors. Industry magazines noticed. Awards followed. Then, one morning, a national business magazine published a feature about my company. By evening, Mom's message arrived. Family dinner, no excuses. Curiosity finally won. Sunday evening, I walked into the restaurant. The private dining room was already full. Mom smiled too brightly. Dad stood. Rachel looked strangely nervous. Then, a tall man in a tailored navy suit immediately stood from the end of the table. He walked directly toward me, smiled warmly, and extended his hand. Ms. Collins, I'm Daniel Mercer, the managing partner of Horizon Capital. My breath caught. Horizon Capital was one of the largest investment firms in the country. Before I could respond, Daniel smiled again. I'm here because your parents and sister told me they could arrange a business partnership between us. I slowly turned toward my family. Rachel couldn't meet my eyes. Dad smiled nervously. Mom whispered, surprise, sometimes the people who betrayed your dreams don't come back because they've changed. They come back because they finally realize your success is worth something, and they still believe they're entitled to a share of it. The room fell completely silent. I looked at the man standing in front of me. Daniel Mercer. He smiled warmly. The same. I shook his hand. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. My parents looked relieved. Mom smiled. See? We knew you'd be happy. I slowly turned toward her. Why exactly am I here? Dad answered confidently. Daniel is interested in cybersecurity. We told him Rachel could work with you. Rachel finally looked up. We've both matured. We thought maybe the family could finally build something together. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because somehow, after destroying my first company, they genuinely believed I'd hand them another opportunity. Daniel looked confused. I'm sorry. I feel like I've walked into the middle of a conversation. I smiled politely. You have. He looked between all of us. Your parents told me Rachel helped build your first company. I slowly leaned back in my chair. They said that? Mom nodded enthusiastically. Rachel has always had a brilliant business mind. Daniel smiled politely. I'd love to hear how the first company started. Rachel immediately began talking. We worked together in the early days. She continued confidently. I helped shape the client's strategy. I quietly interrupted. No. The room became silent again. Daniel looked at me. No? My first company had exactly one employee. Me. I wrote every proposal. I answered every support ticket. I landed every client. Rachel's smile disappeared. Dad quickly interrupted. Well, she supported you emotionally. I calmly replied, no. She took my confidential client information and used it to start a competing company. Daniel's expression changed immediately. He looked toward Rachel. Is that true? Nobody answered. He looked at my father. Mr. Collins. Dad cleared his throat. It wasn't exactly like that. I quietly removed my phone, opened an old folder. I keep records. Inside were emails, client statements, termination notices. One former client's written statement describing how my father had introduced Rachel as my replacement. I slid the phone across the table. Daniel read silently. The longer he read, the more serious he became. Finally, he placed the phone down, then looked directly at Rachel. You represented yourself using confidential business information that wasn't yours? Rachel quietly whispered. It wasn't illegal. I calmly answered. It wasn't ethical either. Daniel folded his hands. In my business, character matters more than presentations. Nobody spoke. He looked toward my parents. You invited me here, believing I'd invest in a partnership. Mom smiled weakly. Yes? Daniel slowly nodded. I will. Everyone looked relieved. Then he continued. but not the partnership you imagined. He turned toward me. Ms. Collins, my firm has followed your company for nearly 2 years. I blinked. What? We've already completed our research. We weren't here because your parents introduced you. We were already interested. I looked genuinely surprised. You were? He smiled. We simply accepted dinner because your family insisted they could arrange the introduction. He paused. The truth is, Chipko, you've been on our investment list for months. Rachel looked completely stunned. Mom whispered, you already knew who she was. Daniel nodded. Very well. He looked back at me. I'd still like to discuss a possible partnership. But he glanced toward the rest of the table. I'd prefer to do that somewhere more professional. I smiled. I'd like that. Dad suddenly leaned forward. So, the whole family can be involved? Daniel answered without hesitation. No. Silence. I only invest in people I trust. His eyes briefly moved toward Rachel. And trust has a history. Those words landed like stones. Rachel quietly pushed her chair back. I think we should leave. Mom looked panicked. No, we can explain. Daniel stood. I don't think any more explanation is necessary. He turned to me. Would you have time tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? I smiled. I'll be there. He shook my hand once more, then politely excused himself. As soon as the dining room door closed, my parents looked at me. Mom started crying. We only wanted everyone together again. I gently shook my head. No, you wanted access. You didn't call when I lost everything. You didn't call when I rebuilt. You called after my success became valuable. Dad lowered his head. We made mistakes. You destroyed my first dream. I rebuilt without you. I won't risk my second. Rachel quietly whispered. I'm sorry. I looked at her. I believe you. But forgiveness doesn't automatically create another opportunity. She nodded. I understand. For the first time, I believed she actually did. I stood, picked up my coat, then looked at my parents one final time. I truly hope your family heals. Mom frowned. We are your family. I smiled sadly. Family doesn't sabotage each other's future. Then I quietly walked away. This time, nobody tried to stop me. Epilogue, soft piano becomes warm and hopeful, carrying the quiet certainty that true success isn't measured by money. It's measured by the peace you finally earn. 9 months later, Horizon Capital became one of our largest strategic partners, not because of family connections, because of years of hard work. Our company doubled in size, expanded internationally, created hundreds of new jobs. The first people I hired in every new office were talented people who had been overlooked somewhere else, because I knew exactly how that felt. As for Rachel, her company eventually closed, not because I destroyed it, because trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild in business. One afternoon, she called me, not asking for money, not asking for clients, just asking if we could have coffee. We talked for 2 hours. She admitted she had spent years trying to become successful by standing in someone else's shadow. Instead of building her own, it was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. My parents changed too. Slowly, they stopped asking for favors, started asking how I was doing. For the first time, they listened more than they spoke. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's finally built on honesty instead of entitlement. My thoughts, looking back, losing my first company felt like the end of my life. It wasn't. It was the beginning of building something no one else could take away. Success built on betrayal eventually collapses. Success built on integrity has room to grow for years. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't proving your family wrong. It's becoming so confident in what you've built that you no longer need their approval at all. And when people who once underestimated you finally come back, you don't have to slam the door. You simply choose who gets a seat at your table.